Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session International Cooperation. Many of you have followed the previous session when the International Association of Wild and Fire handed over awards. That took a little bit longer, and it's understandable. So we're trying to catch up with the remaining time of an hour and maybe stretching a little bit into the coffee break time. Well, you see my name here. My name is Johann Goldammer. I'm the director of the Global Fire Monitoring Center, and I would like to give some introductory remarks about what do we want to address in this session here. We will talk, among other, about international standards. We will talk about cross-border cooperation and knowledge sharing. We will be looking very briefly in the beginning to international guidelines that we have available, and we do this in the context of the overall objective of this conference concerning the development of best principles of landscape fire governance, and in the end aiming at an international framework. In a previous session yesterday, I had mentioned already the guidelines that have been established since the 1990s. They always have tried to put best practice based on scientific evidence into understandable guidance, and that is the International Tropical Timber Organization, represented here today in this room, the World Health Organization, and the FAO. FAO is on our panel today. And we may also touch the question of interoperability. There are various examples of standards that have been applied globally in the past decades. This morning, in the first session of international cooperation, we heard about the history, the long-standing history of the United States Forest Service in global outreach programs. Also, yesterday we talked about how to reach communities, the local communities, because best practices and good standards should also reach the local people, those where fire is used in the rural landscapes, but also those rural communities that are mostly affected by wildfires. So the village defense guidelines that have been developed here in Europe over the last years have been trying to address this by considering the different local cultures, as can be seen here on this example. There are other guidelines, those that have been produced by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, together with the Global Fire Monitoring Center, and we have the representative of the OSC here with us. These guidelines are addressing fire management on contaminated terrain, very critical issue in some countries that are burdened with the heritage of armed conflicts, as well as industrial accidents, or, for instance, the failure of nuclear power plant, like in this case of Chernobyl. Other themes are international mechanisms, assuring cross-sectoral and regional approaches in landscape fire management. We will look at the implementation, state, and governance of integrated fire management. Not all of this will we are relatively brief in the presentations today, will be addressed by the presentations, but it is up to you, to the audience, to please ask questions later on, and that refers also to international standard procedures, qualification, certification. And then later on today, in the next session after the coffee break, we will actually continue to report back from the Global Wildland Fire Network that starts at 4:30 in room Infante, and you are invited to attend also that session. So we do not want to overlap these sessions. Now, I would like to hand over to the OSCE and to Ezra Boutanri. She is a Senior Climate Change Advisor at the Office of the Coordinator of the OSCE Economic and Environmental Activities and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Prior to that, she was the head of the Environmental Cooperation Unit at the OSCE. And Ezra has been working for the last 25 years at the interface between environmental development, foreign and security policy. In her current position at the OSCE, she has been focusing on raising awareness and building capacity on the linkages between climate change and security, as well as promoting regional cooperation to identify and address climate-related security risks in different regions. Ezra, the floor is yours. If I may leave my materials.
Yeah, thank you.
So, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Goldemer. Thank you, dear Johan, and many thanks to our hosts for having us in this beautiful city of Porto. Well, good afternoon, colleagues. As Professor Goldemer has mentioned, I'm representing the OSCE, Office of Coordinator of OSCE Economic and Environmental Activities. Our secretariat, OSCE Secretariat, is based in Vienna, Austria, and we have several field operations in different parts of our region. Maybe a few words on the OSCE. As you may know, it's the world's largest regional security organization under Chapter 8 of UN Charter. We have 57 participating states from Europe, Asia, and North America. We also have maintained special relations with 11 countries, or as we call Asian and Mediterranean partners for cooperation. The OSCE has a comprehensive approach to security, which includes not only political military aspects, but also economic and environmental, as well as human rights aspects. So the issues related to disaster risk reduction and climate change, which we are discussing today, are mainly addressed in the OSCE's economic and environmental dimension, which is also called as the second dimension of the organization. Our work in these two fields mainly build on two-way relationship. The first one is about how these two issues impact security and stability. And as you know, disasters affect the security of people, but also nations. And climate change significantly increases disaster risks in a variety of ways. And in addition, climate change on its own acts as a risk and threat multiplier when it comes to security. So in both areas, their impact cross borders. And thus, transboundary and regional cooperation is required to address these challenges effectively. So this brings me to the second bullet, which is the second way of relationship. That's cooperation on disaster risk reduction and tackling climate change can contribute to good neighborly relations, to conflict prevention, and to confidence building. So in our work, we focus more on this positive narrative of cooperation. As said, we in the OSCE are addressing these challenges through a comprehensive approach and primarily through our economic and environmental dimension. In terms of how we deliver this comprehensive concept, there are mainly two tracks. The first, OSCE providing a forum a platform for political dialogue between its 57 participating states, member states, on climate change, disasters, and their potential implications for security. And this type of political dialogue happens at ambassadorial level and at the ministerial level. The second track is our programmatic work, and for almost 2 decades, we have been implementing projects on disaster risk reduction, and almost for a decade on climate change. And this we are doing with our participating states in the South Caucasus region, in Southeastern Europe region, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, together with our field operations. Maybe I could say a few words on this political dialogue and what are the outcomes of this process so far. In December 2014, in Basel, under the Swiss OSCE chairmanship by then, the ministers of foreign affairs of 57 OSCE participating states adopted a ministerial council decision on enhancing disaster risk reduction. This decision, as you can see on the screen, acknowledges that disasters could be a potential additional contributor to conflicts, and conflicts, along with poor governance, mismanagement and degradation of natural resources, can affect the vulnerability of societies to disasters. The decision also emphasizes that the cooperation among participating states in disaster risk management can contribute to enhancing security and stability. Furthermore, this Ministerial Council decision calls for an integrated approach to disaster risk management, which we will be discussing in this conference. We are discussing in this conference extensively. And it also calls for good governance and transparency in the field of disaster risk reduction. I'm also pleased to underline that the decision makes a specific reference to fire management. When it comes to the political dialogue on climate change, that is also a very important topic and also politically sensitive topic. Let me underline that in the OSCE, all decisions are taken by consensus of 57 member states. So it goes through a very intensive negotiation process. So one of those negotiation processes happened in December 2021 in Stockholm during the Swedish OSCE chairpersonship, where the 57 foreign ministers adopted a decision on climate change. And this decision, again, explains the link of climate change with security and stability, and also it underlines the importance of cooperation. Cooperation in many areas, as you can see on the screen, but including on disaster risk reduction and management. This has been an important achievement for the OSCE community after many years of work to have a decision for our security organization, a decision on climate change has been an important milestone. The second track of our work, in addition to political dialogue, as I have mentioned, is the programmatic work, which I think it's more relevant for our discussions today as well. So for close to 2 decades, we have been implementing several initiatives and projects to assess risks associated with fires, including in sensitive settings, as Professor Goldemer has highlighted. And these initiatives aim to enhance local, national, and regional capacities for fire management. I can give you a few examples. For instance, in the case of South Caucasus region, we conducted forest fire vulnerability assessments in all 3 countries, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, and organized several national roundtables with a variety of stakeholders. Building on these consultation processes, we facilitated development of national fire management policies. in the region. And then we partnered with Canadian Forest Service and supported the design of regional fire danger rating system. And in all this work, of course, a Global Fire Monitoring Center, Professor Goldamer as himself, has been engaged along with different regional fire monitoring centers, including like our colleague, Professor Nikolov. So we organized, in addition to region-specific activities, we have also organized several regional and cross-regional trainings for fire management authorities and brigades on preparedness, prevention, and response to wildfire risks, disasters. And for instance, we organized 2 regional trainings in Turkey, which brought together the countries of South Caucasus and Southeastern Europe region in Antalya. In different regions, we have also organized dedicated capacity building activities, table exercises to manage fires burning on areas contaminated by radioactivity or unexploded ordnance and landmines. For instance, this included areas like Chernobyl exclusion zone, and Professor Goldamer also mentioned that. And last but not least, we supported the establishment of a regional fire management resource center for Central Asia based in Mongolia in Ulaanbaatar. Maybe also a quick look at the climate change and security, the activities that we organized in the area of climate change and security. Because that will then bring me to the interlinkages between the 2 topics. So for almost 10 years now, we have been implementing different projects in the OSCE to address climate-related security risks. And currently, we are working in 4 regions: South Caucasus, Southeastern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Our main partner in this exercise is Berlin-based think tank Adelphi. So through this project, we are aiming to enhance the understanding of how climate change and security risks impact these 4 regions. We aim to increase cooperation among regional stakeholders to jointly address these risks. And we are aiming to increase awareness and capacities of main stakeholders to ensure an integrated approach. The project enjoys the technical and political support of the countries that we are working in, and we have a number of donors, including Andorra, Austria, Czech Republic, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Norway, Poland, Sweden, and the United States. I wanted to name them all and thank them in this platform. So this regional approach that we are pursuing in addressing climate change challenges is one of the unique features of the OSCE's work in this field. And another unique feature is the participatory nature, where we engage with all national and local stakeholders. So far, through this program, we have conducted comprehensive climate security risk assessments in the 4 regions that I have mentioned, and we have identified, together with the regional local stakeholders, 42 hotspots. And what we are now doing is we are approaching to each of the selected hotspots and working deeper to ensure cooperation between the neighboring countries in jointly addressing these risks. And this brings me to my last slide. Well, in all these climate security activities, especially since 2020, landscape fire management and wildfire risk reduction has been addressed as an integral part of this work. For instance, in the South Caucasus, we are now supporting cross-border cooperation in 2 shared hotspots in the region between Azerbaijan and Georgia, and between Armenia and Georgia. In case of Armenia and Georgia, we are promoting cross-border cooperation among the neighboring municipalities of Bolnisi and Sarkapet. And our work in the case of Azerbaijan and Georgia will be starting soon. So what we are trying to do is to enhance community cooperation between the neighboring municipalities on community-level fire prevention and response, to facilitate also coordination between local forestry, emergency, and border security services, and to raise awareness among farmers, residents, youth on prevention and control of fires. Some of our national counterparts are also here with us in this room and in this conference, and I would like to thank them again for all their cooperation. Whereas in the case of Southeastern Europe, we are working in Shara Mountains and Korab Massive area, which is a shared biodiversity hotspot covering 4 protected areas and which is home to more than 100,000 people who rely a lot on forest resources for living. We have recently embarked on a new initiative to strengthen fire preparedness and prevention capacities of the protected area authorities at the local level. And again, our main partners are Global Fire Monitoring Center and the Regional Fire Monitoring Center for Southeastern Europe and Caucasus in this initiative. As you see on the screen, we are also promoting cross-regional networking and exchanges between regions. For instance, last year in December, we brought together representatives of national institutions, both in charge of climate change, but also on emergency management authorities from South Caucasus, Southeastern Europe, and Mongolia. We organized a joint event in Skopje in North Macedonia. So these are some of our activities which we hope to continue in all these regions, and we will continue to rely on the support and interest of our participating states who take part in these initiatives and who also financially support us. And we rely on our partners like Global Fire Monitoring Center and the regional centers in Skopje, Kiev, and Ulaanbaatar. And we hope to expand our partners base. For instance, with FAO, we are now engaged in the Mountain Partnership, which we believe opens new grounds for us to collaborate. Thank you.
Thanks, Esra. Now we are going directly to our next speaker. Julia Haas is representing the Secretariat, the liaison unit of the Ministerial Conference for the Protection of Forests in Europe. Julia Haas is a policy advisor at the Forest Europe liaison unit in Bonn since 2023, where she coordinates the work towards the Pan-European Forest Risk Knowledge Mechanism, in brief, 4RISKs. She holds a master's degree in forestry and wood sciences and a PhD in plant cell and molecular biology. Building on the Bratislava ministerial resolution adapting pan-European forests to climate change of 2021, Forest Europe is currently working towards the 4RISK, to support forest adaptation to changing climatic and site conditions, as well as to enhance the resilience and mitigation potential of forests at a pan-European level to disturbances such as wildfires. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, all of you, for participating at this international conference. It's a pleasure to be here and a great honor. And thank you, Professor Goldammer, for giving me the chance to introduce the 4RISK mechanism and especially the work of Forest Europe at this conference. As Johan introduced myself, I'm working for Forest Europe, currently situated in Bonn, in Germany. And today I will present on the Forest Risk Knowledge Mechanism. But before we start with this, I will briefly give you a background on the work of Forest Europe and the establishment of Forest Europe. So, we all are enjoying the different services and goods that forests provide to us, such as non-timber and timber products, Forests are wildlife habitat, forests are carbon storage, forests are used for recreational purposes, and we are all thriving and enjoying all these goods and services. However, forests need to be healthy to provide these services and goods to us, and they need to stay healthy in the future. And we are all aware of the increasing severity and frequency of forest disturbances causing forest damages all over Europe, but also worldwide, and are expected to increase even with climate change in the coming years. Already 30 years ago, the ministers working in the ministries of and dealing with forestry have recognized the need to minimize forest damages and the need to adapt forests to climate change, and therefore have founded the Ministerial Conference on the Protection of Forests in Europe, today known as Forest Europe. It is a high-level political process running on a voluntary basis, wherein signatories of 45 European countries and the European Union, as well as 59 observer organizations, have committed to work together and cooperatively on the forest damage monitoring and assessment, and most importantly, to promote sustainable forest management. Forest monitoring is needed to obtain data on the status of forests. And 30 years ago, the European Network of Permanent Sample Plots for Monitoring of Forest Ecosystems was founded. Within forest the organizations and the signatories have committed. Thanks to this strong commitment already 30 years ago, we have a really long history of data available that we can use to analyze trends and to design measures and sorry, I'm nervous today, to design measures and strategies to minimize risks and damages. And this is really unique in the European continent, such a long history of available data running for already 30 years. And of course, for data to be relevant, it has to be complete and comparable, especially when looking at a trans-regional scale of this large and vast network. So it has been decided that data acquisition methods and time intervals need to be unified across these signatories and network. And so certain criteria and indicators were designed. And one of the important criteria in this monitoring system is the maintenance of forest ecosystem health and vitality criterion, where we are looking at deposition and concentration of air pollutants, but also at forest damage, such as wildfire events. And this collection of data allows Forest Europe, together with FAO and UNECE, to produce every 5 years the report on the state of Europe's forests. Currently, the collection of data has started and will produce the next report until 2025. Forest Europe has a rotating system, so every 4 years, a new country is decided to take over the lead. Currently, it is Germany that has the chairmanship, and the current working program was decided at the 8th Ministerial Conference in Bratislava. The next chair will be in Turkey, and the next Ministerial Conference deciding on the working program during the Turkish chairmanship is going to be next year, end of next year, in 2024. During the current working program, the signatories and observers have recommitted themselves to focus on the sustainable forest management, the criteria and indicators, and to continue the work on the State of Europe's Forests report. However, due to the situation in forests, the large-scale disturbances that are causing also large-scale changes and rapidly changing factors in the forests, it was also decided that these criteria and indicators need to be reviewed. And additionally, it was decided upon that we need not only forest monitoring, but additionally we need to develop a system to also for risk monitoring, risk mapping, and risk prediction, which will be an extension to the forest monitoring. So therefore, Forest Europe is currently working on the forest risk knowledge mechanism to create a platform to cooperate between the countries, but also to allow to interact with already existing European processes to better to provide synergies with these already existing processes. Forest Europe is also promoting the work on green jobs and forest education, and is also working on a mechanism called the Rapid Response Mechanism as a forum to exchange on emerging urgent issues, such as the support for the Ukrainian forest sector. Overall, all these sectors are connected also with our communication work, which is an important factor, of course, to broadcast our knowledge to the broad public. Briefly, I want to also spend one slide on this ministerial decision on the Ukraine, which the Forest Europe signatories and observers have endorsed in 22. The objective is to build back better the forest sector in the Ukraine, and based on a report on the current situation. The forest sector has asked Forest Europe especially to help with capacity building workshops on fire prevention and to help enable one-on-one meetings with international organizations, signatories, and observers. If you have any questions on these, please feel free to contact Forest Europe. For now, I want to focus more on the work stream on the forest risk knowledge mechanism that is planned for a full-scale launch after the German chairmanship in 2024. To assess if this for risk has added value for the signatories and observers, further to assess the costs, the feasibility, and whether improvements and adjustments are needed in the concept. For now, a forest risk pilot is launched, running until February 24. This forest risk pilot is divided in 3 separate pilot phases, each focusing on a specific thematic strand: wildfires, biotic threats, and followed by storm. But as all these forest disturbances are also interconnected, there is also an overarching pilot phase connecting these forest disturbances to strengthen adaptation and resilience in forests. This was planned. So what we do during this pilot is that we are testing different policy tools. One example are policy briefs, which we are developing with the help of our experts. Another policy tool are communication products, running communication campaigns on social medias to raise awareness, but also providing professional communication tools such as videos to the broad public. We are providing capacity building and knowledge exchange via seminars, webinars, organizing workshops, in allowing national experts to come together from different countries, but most importantly also working on establishing expert networks. We are screening for relevant already existing initiatives. We are connecting between national experts and providing best case studies to the community. The added value of these policy tools is to be inclusive, broadcasting the rich diversity of the European countries involved, is to be innovative, strengthening the exchange at the policy, science, practice interface, providing relevant information also to policymakers, is to be efficient, to know what is already there, and strengthen synergies with already existing European processes. It is flexible. With the regular exchange within the network with the signatories, it allows us to rapidly respond to emerging issues. And last but not least, and very important, is of course the ownership, that signatories involved need to accept that everyone is responsible to make for risk successful and for the successful implementation also after the German chairmanship. All these activities are at the end evaluated, allowing us to define the terms of reference and to develop a transition plan after the German chairmanship and for the full-scale launch in 2024. I briefly want to go into detail of one of these policy tools. The policy brief, Reducing Wildfire Risk in Europe Through Sustainable Forest Management, is one of the examples that allowed us to organize a common voice and understanding within Europe on this topic. Within this policy brief, governments are called on to radically shift their investment in wildfires to focus on prevention and preparedness. Sustainable forest management can contribute to fire prevention and also to a more effective restoration after wildfire events. Foresters can play an active role in influencing fuel type, especially when it comes to structure and density in forests, and therefore sustainable forest management will help create landscapes that are more resilient to future disturbances. In conclusion, fire management and sustainable forest management is closely linked. Furthermore, the policy brief makes it clear that sustainable forest management and integrated fire management must be people-centered and locally adapted. As we have heard several times, only the local communities know how to use fire to make land arable, and we need this knowledge. We need to preserve this knowledge and empower communities to also collaborate and interact and become active in risk prevention and making landscapes more resilient. All strategies that are focusing on risk prevention must address the whole risk cycle: prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. But with all this, we still need to acknowledge that even the best managed forests might burn under extreme weather conditions. There's no future without fire. And with this, I would like to summarize what FORESC is in a nutshell. FORESC is a pan-European approach aiming at increased forest resilience and adaptation by stimulating the collaboration between research and practice, providing recommendations and guidance for policymakers. It is supporting cross-border cooperation, ensuring knowledge transfer and information sharing, speeding up the response to new and unexpected events, and last but not least, increasing capacity of countries to better communicate the forest disturbance risk issue to policymakers and the broad public. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Julia, for your presentation. And now I'm inviting our delegation, and especially the leader of the delegation of People's Republic of China, Mr. Haijong Wang, to come on the stage, supported by Mrs. UK for this translation. Mr. Wang is Forest and Grassland Fire Prevention Officer of the National Forestry and Grassland Administration of China. Welcome to the conference. Please.
好，谢谢今天的会议给我这个发言机会。女士们、先生们，下午好。
Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
中国幅员辽阔，高森林火险每年在南北方交叉出现，形成全年防火局面，防控任务十分繁重。
China has a very extensive territory where the northern and southern part faces high risks of forest fire in an overlapping way. That means during the whole year, we are overloaded with fire prevention and control missions.
1987年，中国东北的大兴安岭发生特大森林火灾，持续燃烧28天，伤亡476人，烧毁森林100多万公顷。 直接经济损失高达5亿元人民币。
Back in 1987, a catastrophic forest fire broke out in the Greater Qinghai Mountains in northern East China, lasting for 28 days and causing 476 casualties. More than 1 million hectares of forest were burned, and direct economic losses were as high as $1.85 million approximately.
此后，中国政府持续加大森林火灾防控力度。2018年，政府机构改革后，森林草原防火由应急和林草部门共同负责。林草主管部门负责森林草原火灾预防，开展火灾防火巡护、火源管理、日常检查、宣传教育、防火设施建设和火情早期处置工作。而应急部门负责综合指导各地和相关部门防控火灾，牵头开展火灾预警、监测和信息发布，组织指导协调火灾扑救工作。
Since then, the Chinese government has multiplied its efforts to prevent and control forest fires. After the institutional reform of the central government in 2018, forest and grassland fire prevention is jointly carried out by 2 governmental entities. On one hand, NFGA, the institution that I represent, is mainly responsible for fire prevention by carrying out patrols, compostability management, daily inspection, public awareness and education, construction of fire prevention facilities, and early intervention, among other tasks. On the other hand, the Ministry of Emergency Management of China is in charge of guiding local authorities and relevant departments to prevent and control fire, carry out early warning, monitoring, and information release, as well as organizing and coordinating firefighting work.
相关部门和地方政府密切配合，火灾防控能力和水平得到了进一步的提升。森林火灾发生次数由前期每年万余起下降到1000起以下，取得了在森林面积和蓄积量持续双增长情况下，火灾发生数量和损失双下降的成果，有力保护了人民生命财产和生态资源安全。
By close and intense cooperation among relevant departments and local governments, the fire prevention and control capabilities have been greatly improved, yielding very positive outcomes. For example, we have witnessed significant reduction of forest fire cases, dropping from more than 10,000 cases to now less than 1,000 each year. With that, losses caused are much less than before as well. We believe that it is a remarkable result, especially in considering that both China's forest coverage and stock volume are continuously increasing meanwhile. We have indeed effectively safeguarded our people's lives and property, as well as ecological resources.
中国森林火灾防控的主要做法是：一、始终坚持预防为主、积极消灭、生命至上、安全第一的工作方针，将减少火灾发生、降低火灾损失、确保人民生命财产和生态资源安全放在最重要的位置。
Here are some key practices in China to prevent and control forest fire. Firstly, under the guiding principle of prevention comes first, suppression must be active, life is paramount, and safety must be ensured. We strive to reduce the occurrences as well as losses caused while prioritizing people's life and the security of ecological resources.
第二是积极建立部门协同、信息共享、联防联控的防灭火一体化运作机制，形成了防、救、查分工明确、协调顺畅、配合密切、调度有序的工作体系，充分发挥工作合力。
Secondly, we have actively established an integrated operation mechanism for fire prevention and control, where information is shared among well-synchronized departments related to the issue, and the responsibility of prevention and suppression are jointly carried out. Under this mechanism, division of labor concerning fire prevention, disaster relief, and following investigation is quite clear, and a working system featuring good coordination, close cooperation, and orderly organization has been established to give full play to joint efforts.
三是强化属地责任，对早期火情打早打小打了，建立网格化责任体系，及时发布火险预警、隐患提示。
Thirdly, we have delegated power and consolidated local responsibilities to carry out early intervention, trying to reduce intensity and suppress the fire in its very first stage. A great management system with specified responsibilities have been created, while fire warning and potential threats reminders are released to relevant parties in a timely manner.
第四是强化基层防灭火力量建设，加快组建基层专业消防队伍，加强业务技能培训，提升队伍的正规化、标准化、专业化水平。
Fourthly, special efforts are dedicated to strengthening the capacity of local forces and speeding up the establishment of official, standardized, and professional firefighting teams at the grassroots level, reinforcing knowledge and techniques training.
第五是加强重点地区林火阻隔系统建设，推进蓄水池、拦水坝、无人机巡护应用等基础设施建设，积极争取将防火重大基础设施建设纳入国家重点项目。
Fifthly, we have consolidated the construction of fire isolation system in key areas by completing infrastructures such as reservoirs, dams, and drone patrollers. At the same time, we are actively working on the inclusion of major fire prevention infrastructure construction into national key projects upon approval of the State Council of China.
六是建立专家智库，为火灾的预防、早期处理提供决策支持。
The last point is about establishing an expert think tank to provide technical support in terms of fire prevention and early intervention.
在做好国内火灾防控的同时，我们与俄罗斯、蒙古、朝鲜、越南、缅甸等陆相接壤的国家，就边境地区火灾防控工作进行密切沟通，建立起良好的森林草原防火合作关系，主要围绕火情信息通报、火灾应对等进行协作，有效防范了跨境火灾的发生和蔓延。
While marching ahead with firm and steady steps in domestic work, we are working closely with Russia, Mongolia, North Korea, Vietnam, Myanmar, and other neighboring countries on fire prevention and control in border areas. With them, we have established good relationship and are cooperating mainly on information sharing and fire suppression, among other topics, having effectively reduced the occurrence and prevented the spread of cross-border fires.
今后我们愿意继续加强和接壤国家的合作，同时愿意和其他国家加强合作交流，不断提高自身和相关国家的火灾防控能力，共同推进全球森林火灾治理取得积极成效，为建设一个更为安全美丽的地球家园做出应有的贡献。
In the future, we look forward to further strengthening cooperation with our neighbors and carrying out new cooperation and exchanges with other countries. We firmly believe that by continuously improving the fire prevention and control capabilities of ourselves and others, we can make joint contribution to the global forest fire governance, and among all, we're going to build a safer and a more beautiful planet.
谢谢大家。
Thank you for your attention.
Welcome you go to the People's Republic of China. 谢谢。
Welcome to China.
Thank you very much. Now we have heard the national message from China, including the relationships with neighboring countries in cooperation in fire management. And now we are turning, thank you once again for your contribution. We are turning again to one country in Europe, and I'm calling to the stage Dr. Gabriel Xantopoulos, who is from Greece. He holds BSc degree in forestry from Aristotelian University of Thessaloniki in Greece and a Master of Science and PhD with a specialization in forest fire science from the University of Montana in the United States. Gabriel has been active in European forest fire research for more than 30 years. He has extensive experience in forest fire management training and postgraduate university teaching and has produced numerous scientific publications. He is currently serving as research director on forest fires and is head of the Forest Fire Laboratory of the Institute of Mediterranean Forest Ecosystems of the Hellenic Agriculture Organization, Dimitra. And Gabriel will present his views as displayed on the screen. Gabriel.
Thank you. So we will be talking about the requirements of countries participating in international cooperation. And simply at the end, we will be talking about some examples from Greece. The first point is the identification that many people have carried out during these days here, that we are facing a worsening situation regarding forest fires. There is an increasing trend in forest fire disasters around the world and an expansion of their occurrence in countries previously thought immune. It signifies the need for better fire management based on a deeper understanding of the true underlying problems. If you don't know a problem, you cannot solve it. The reasons for the worsening trend have been illustrated through numerous studies and include increased occurrence of extreme fire weather conditions due to climate change, increases in forest fuel quantity and continuity due to rural population decrease and land abandonment, expansion of human activities, development of wild and urban interface areas, recreation, agriculture into forested areas, changes of how fires are managed professionally, seemingly effectively, but ultimately inefficiently, prone to the so-called fire paradox phenomenon. And this is a graph that I feel shows why. I mean, it's a very basic graph that we need to keep in our mind. The world rural population decline as a percent of the total population in a global stage. And when we do it by countries, at least in Mediterranean Europe, we are seeing the same exact trend in most countries, and those who have had the most strong decline are the ones that are facing the worst problems. So we have to keep this in mind when we are discussing about this, because we are talking a lot about abandonment of the countryside, and here is what we are looking at. Paradigm change is needed. This is something that many scientists call for. forest fire management necessarily includes the need for effective fire suppression, but should not be limited to it, as by itself it cannot solve the problem. It has been discussed in many presentations in this conference. Policy and expenditures should be rebalanced between suppression and mitigation of the negative impacts of fire. Between prevention, suppression, and mitigation of the negative impacts of fire. Word is missing here. It's very important that if we look around, there are many countries where suppression takes the lion's share from the budget. And then the problems exist. That's part of what's happening in Greece. And at the end, the same guys who are called to put out the fires, and they are asking all the time for more resources and more planes, etc. And then they say, yes, but you have not cleaned the forest, you have not done so and so, after they have absorbed all the budget. So it's something to be stressed. Policy effectiveness should not be primarily measured as a function of area burned, as it usually is, but rather as a function of avoided socio-ecological damage and loss. This is a publication here by Moreira et al., by renowned scientists, that was done in 2020 with the title Wildfire Management in Mediterranean-type Regions, Paradigm Change Needed, and I suggest that you can take a look at that if you want to see deeper what we mean by that. Level of preparedness for forest fires. The extreme fires of the last few years have clearly demonstrated that such disasters cannot be avoided altogether. These disasters that have been discussed in many slides here and so on, I removed them from the presentation in order to shorten it a little bit. The concept of mega fires, actually, it was coined in the 2000s. In this trend of worsening situation, in 2000, the term mega fires was coined and attests to the fact that we have such a decline, a worsening trend. A mega fire is an intense wildland fire that, because of extreme intensity, rate of spread, and the resistance to control, remains beyond the suppression capacity of any firefighting resources until the conditions change. Such fires usually pose great risks to human lives and resources. And no country can be prepared for the 100% worst case, because building and maintaining an extremely large and technologically advanced firefighting mechanism requires a huge cost. That is, if we have a country and we are trying to improve and make it so strong that it will be able to fence off any disaster, forest fires in this case, but it does not apply only to forest fires, then at the end of the scale, as we are approaching 95, 97, 98%, the cost goes steep up. And the cost grows exponentially for each percentage point improvement towards 100%, but at the same time, much of the mechanism is underused. We have to consider this as well. We are putting a lot of money in suppression, and when we are doing that, we are leaving that mechanism practically unused. I will give you an example. In Greece, we are contracting some of the most expensive aerial resources, and with 300 hours of guaranteed flight time in one summer season, each one of them. And at the end, we end up to see that, oh, this is an easy fire season and we're not using up those flight hours. So let's send an Ericsson helicopter to put out grass fires. And that is like being too large on expenses. At the same time, that money could be used much better in some other point. And also, if you are having such a relaxed mechanism most of the time, when you really need them, they're not being in good position because they are relaxed. Whereas a mechanism that really picks up during the fire season is really effective because there is some inertia in the start of every season, according to my experience. Effectiveness increases with more resources, but efficiency drops sharply. And alternative uses of the funds must also be considered. How much should the country spend on forest fire management? And why not give it to hospitals, to education, to pensions, to whatever? So we have to be very practical about it and be very careful how we spend the money. Any intense wildfire, as we all know, may exceed the local firefighting capacity. Within a country, this is naturally handled by bringing in firefighting resources from the neighboring towns, then from the neighboring counties, the neighboring prefectures, or even from regions, or from other agencies. Let's say we call the army, or we call the civil protection resources, or whatever. So there is mutual help, and they are piling up. Large countries can do more of this response than smaller ones. If you are in the United States, or if you are in China, maybe, you can bring resources from one area to the other, and the resources as a total, they are very large. In a country like Greece, it's a small country, the limit, when you have huge fires, is easier to be reached. However, there can always be a capacity limit, often as a result of multiple fires that bring the firefighting recruitment requirement beyond the break point of the suppression organization. That's how I like to view suppression organization, that each one has its breaking point. It can be 3 large fires, 5 large fires, depending on the size of the country and so on, and how many resources you have. In some cases, in some countries, it can be only 1 large fire. That is when the countries resort to help from abroad. And this has happened many times in recent history, including not only smaller countries, such as Greece in 2007 and 2021, but also the USA, Canada, and Australia, which back in the beginning of the 2000s started building a very good system of mutual help. And there were cases when I remember people from Australia came to the United States, especially qualified people that were able to be as leaders in teams that the United States, for example, inmate groups, could be sent to a fire, but they didn't have qualified persons in the ICS system in order to guide them to the fire. And 1 year later, if I remember correctly, 2002 or 2003, there was the opposite direction. I mean, people from the States went to Australia. The European Union, seeing the problems that we have, the worsening problems with forest fires, and especially after the disaster in Portugal in 2017, conceived and established the RESC-EU mechanism, which is a new European reserve of resources that aims to strengthen European preparedness for disasters through mutual help. It includes a fleet of firefighting planes and helicopters. It started based on forest fires, and now it covers other disasters as well. An example of mutual help is here, how you see it pointed out in Canada in the recent fires that they had 2 weeks ago. And what you're seeing is that we have some fires where it says mutual help. That is where you have beyond the agency limits and so on, and you are asking for help from the others. If we look at it at a stage of Greece, for example, in 2007, clearly, for 4 days, the conditions were beyond any capacity of the local fire service, which was also scared at some point with the fierceness of the fire and the multiple deaths. We had 84 deaths that year. And so they asked for help, and we started receiving help. And here is a list of the help that we received within the next 10 days, let's say, of the fire situation that developed. And here is what was repeated in 2021, when again we had multiple fires which became very large. Actually, we had the largest fire ever in Greece, with the largest resources ever available in Greece. And that is the fire that you see up on Evia Mountain, that finally, on Evia Island, that finally became the largest fire ever, which not only became largest, over 50,000 hectares, but it was stopped on 3 sides by the sea, the largest fire break you know. So it is a warning sign that things can get even worse in the future. And we have countries like Sweden and the North in general that sometimes find themselves in need of assistance. And here we see that even Portuguese planes were sent there, and French planes were sent there in 2018. And then next year we see that Sweden wants to acquire their own water bombers after last year's wildfire disasters across Europe. Which means what? That is the first thing that they want, and somebody else pointed out here, is that they are turning into more suppression. They would like to increase suppression, but how often will they use the resources if they buy a large fleet? So we have to think about it if it's effective and efficient. Now, regarding firefighting, without proper preparation, international assistance may become more of a nuisance than true help, and end up as a publicity stunt in the mass media by a government being in a tight spot. When we have, especially in a small country, a problem and we ask for help, sometimes it's out of desperation and we need to say something to the public that we are trying and we are asking for help internationally. Within the European Union, now this is the rescue mechanism which we mobilize, but as I showed you earlier, it wasn't only the rescue mechanism that helped Greece in 2021. And for each country, it's important to determine when help is needed, and as well as what type of help in order to maximize benefits, as it may often carry significant cost. This is something that is hidden to the public sometimes. I mean, help is not always free. Rarely it's free. This requires willingness to receive international help. First of all, okay, we are not saying we are invincible. We are saying, okay, we have weaknesses, please help. Clear criteria. We need to set thresholds in advance and say we need this type of resources under these conditions, and meeting certain basic requirements to really benefit from the help. If we are not prepared to receive the help, we will not maximize the use. If, as it has happened in 2007, resources come and you say, go to that fire and do whatever you can, that's not very wise. And if you are like in 2021 and you say to Russia, because you need to say that I do something about the difficult situation, bring in 2 Ilyushin 40-ton planes that have no application to the Greek topography, and they cannot pick up water from the sea as the Canadians do, but they have to go to an airport to land, get water from non-existing infrastructure that would do that fast, then you're just wasting money. And this is what they did. And then the pilots fly at a height of 100 meters, and what comes to the ground is drizzle. So timing is very important, how quickly to ask. Neighboring countries are in a better position to help. The help that, for example, Cyprus receives from Greece or from Israel is much better than if they receive Canadians from Spain. Long-distance help is only relevant in case of a critical fire season developing. That is, if we have agreements and we have criteria, then it makes sense that we can even move resources in advance. This is part of the rescue mechanism concept, which in the beginning it was a discussion about creating one fleet in one base somewhere in Europe. And I was in the discussion about that, and other experts as well, and we said, no, it doesn't make sense. If you have a mechanism staying somewhere and paying a lot of money, and finally when you need it, the countries start fighting who will be the one benefiting from the help, then it would be a problem. So now we have a fleet that is being assembled on the fly. That is, they have common exercises in advance, and then when the requirement goes, for example, in Spain, it will be Canadians from France or Italy coming faster than Greek Canadians, and so on. There should be at least an understanding of the organizational systems used in the countries involved. for example, if there is a common ICS or something like that. Common exercises and personal knowledge of each other of selected officers are valuable. I mean, if the officers meet each other, at least specialized ones, that is, if we have in Greece 4 or 5 officers devoted to that and they know the equivalent ones from Spain and so on, and there are personal communication, it always facilitates. Sharing examples and common training in advance can improve cooperation, obviously. There need to be pre-arranged steps for receiving the incoming resources and assigning them cleverly to the fire fronts. So we need liaison officers speaking the language, or English being a lingua franca. Air bases to be used, which are the ones that can handle, for example, Canadaires of CL-415 in order to have spare parts, etc. Fuel, appropriate. Communications need to be resolved from the beginning. Accommodation and food are important considerations also for the crews that are coming if it's aerial resources, but they don't have only to be aerial resources, it can be ground firefighters. Cost is a serious consideration and should be known in advance. In the rescue mechanism, it is covered by the European Commission, so there is no problem there. Existence of an agreement for mutual help signed in advance can foresee and solve many issues. There should be a debriefing of the experience and an assessment of the final contribution for future improvements. But what I want to stress here is that international cooperation doesn't stop with firefighting. It can be much broader than firefighting. Cooperation outside of the time of crisis can be very effective in upgrading a country's capacity to manage forest fires, but also can increase efficiency. It may include knowledge exchange on overall fire management paradigms, understanding integrated fire management, learning about best practices and failures, making comparisons, etc. Fire prevention problem analysis, planning, designing measures, legislative solutions, dealing with the public, best practices, sharing resources, even models, informatics tools, satellite data, etc. Post-fire practices. Yes. Scientific knowledge exchanges, conferences, etc., and exchange of expertise, especially regarding independent assessments. A key to everything we do is to have a good assessment. And a good assessment, sometimes within the silos of a country, it's very difficult to have if the same people who are the ones acting are the ones who are judging themselves. In the end of the 2021 fire season, the fire service in Greece did an assessment, and it was 5 officers from the fire service judging the effect of the fire service. And they were not able to really do an in-depth assessment. In many countries, silos exist that do not allow for the development of an integrated fire management policy. Without the development of a scientifically based, politically neutral, national fire risk management policy, it is difficult to reach a long-term solution to the forest fire problem. International expert guidance may provide an alternative point of view, helping to solve silo problems where one organization doesn't talk to the other, and also resolve local conflicts, as long as there is an open mind on the side of the inviting country and the true will to change. Obviously, selection of appropriate international expertise is critical. Appointment of appropriate, open-minded, truly qualified personnel to cooperate with international experts, providing data and local knowledge can help to maximize interaction and benefits. One of the main problems requiring international cooperation in order to curb the growing fire risk on the landscape is to promote the involvement of local stakeholders, farmers and foresters, on judiciously using the land in ways that will make it more resilient. Such cooperation can contribute to break silos where state agencies act according to what they think is correct without understanding many social issues, and improve legislation, for example, at the European Union level, and design funding schemes, for example, aiming to curb drainage of rural population towards the cities, empower people to make a living using traditional practices such as open space grazing, agroforestry, and using fire, and to organize locally for self-protection, and disseminate knowledge and train the public, providing examples of good practices. In brief, the requirements: open-minded belief in the value of international cooperation, true willingness to share, disseminate, learn, and teach, organized approach with formal background and clearly set rules and principles. This can help to create trust between all stakeholders and curb international competition and resistance between agencies and within agencies. Stakeholders clearly include and require the contribution of the civil protection. Main aim is the creation of fire-resilient landscapes. Continuous evaluation of the outcome of each activity regarding the level of adoption and the results of application of innovations is really required. In Greece, after the disaster that we had 100 dead people in one fire on July 23, 2018 in Mati, we were called, Professor Goldhammer as the chair of a committee and 5 Greek experts, to check what happened in Greece and why things are going back bad in Greece year after year, becoming worse. And we investigated, including talks with stakeholders, collecting data, analyzing data, and we were able to show what was going on and prepared a report that was delivered to the government with a promise that even the opposition would work with it. Unfortunately, after that, and after many congratulations, it was put on the shelf. It's very difficult to change. And then in 2021, when we had these huge fires, we were asked to reactivate again and help them again. And this is something that is in process even now, and we have done our proposals, and some things are being adopted. International cooperation in the field of forest fires is clearly necessary, especially in view of the worsening fire problem. There are many requirements in order to achieve effectiveness and efficiency. However, many times it is only used by stressed governments as a way to show that they are doing the maximum possible. Without true belief in its value and without trying to maximize the benefits, the money and the effort spent can easily go to waste. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gabriel.
I'm sorry for being a little bit...
Don't worry. Okay, as we had said before, you know, we are stretching into the coffee break because we started 30 minutes late. And before continuing, I would like to introduce 2 of our panelists, and you have seen them before. Lara Steil from the FAO has been here this morning. She is the Forest Officer, Integrated Fire Management at the FAO since July last year. She graduated in biology science and holds a master's degree in biotechnology and a PhD in sanitation. From 2005 to May 22, she was the coordinator of the interagency department at the National Center for Wildfire Prevention and Suppression in Brazil, Previfogo, IBAMA. And also, you have seen Gary Morgan this morning. Maybe Gary, I just introduce you very briefly. He is the chairperson of the government of Victoria Ministerial Advisory Committee on Wildland Fire Risk. Over more than 40 years, Gary has made many significant contributions to the management of forests and forest fires at the state, national, and international levels. And I will come back to your international experience, Gary. And let me ask you first, Lara, at the same time, I would like to ask management to activate the tablet which became black because I may need to see some questions from the audience. Lara, the role of FAO has been mentioned repeatedly in the discussions, not only today, but also in previous presentations and discussions. Now you have seen that we have 2 intergovernmental organizations like the OSCE and the Ministerial Conference for Forests in Europe. They are dealing with the issues that where FAO is mandated in the UN system. How do you see the future of cooperation with these multilateral organizations that seem to work into the same direction?
Yeah, thank you so much, Johan Goldomer, for the question, and thank you to my colleagues in this panel. I will be very brief in my answer for the sake of the time. And I think that, as you mentioned, Johan, all the organizations and all countries seems to me to going in the same directions and promoting this integrated fire management and with this holistic approach. And also this is the approach that FAO is promoting and that FAO is advising the countries to promote. And one point that I would like to bring to discussion in this session, as we are talking about international cooperation, during this conference we are also discussing this this framework on the landscape fire governance, and I advise you to take a look on this framework. I think it's available in the application of the conference. And in this document, with guidelines, the idea is to promote the international cooperation, and with the focus on this idea of a holistic approach. And FAO, together with UNEP, we are developing what we are calling the fire management, the Global Fire Management Hub, or Fire Hub. And in this hub, the idea is to bring together all the institutions, all the multilateral institutions, and also the countries, and also all the initiatives that we have around the world and the lessons learned in this hub. So each region, each country can access this hub and develop, and based on what is already done and based on the lessons learned, can adapt the ideas, the guidelines, the experiences to their own realities, to their own specificities. And this hub, as I mentioned today in the plenary session, will be launched during the closing ceremony of this conference. And one more important thing about the hub is that the hub is an open tent, that this means that we are looking for partnerships for the development of this hub. And I also would like to mention here that the Global Fire Monitoring Center, coordinated by Johan Goldomer, is one of the main partners for the development of this hub, because GFMC has 25, 30, 50 years experience of fire management, and this is a huge work that we want to be reflected in this hub, and also all the 14 regional networks linked to the Global Fire Monitoring Center, and also the regional centers. And so this is, let's say, more or less 50% of the hub is already developed, and so, but this is an open tent, and all the organizations and other initiatives are welcome, and I would like to make me and FAO available for further discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lara, and I think what is important that you are using symbolically the term open tent. You know, we see that the challenges that we need to meet is a very collective task, and where we have many capable contributors, not only the official organizations, but also civil society organizations. They are very important. Gary, I have a question to you. It is now exactly 20 years ago when you organized and your country hosted the 3rd International Wildland Fire Conference, and in addition, the Global Wildland Fire Summit in Sydney, Australia. At that time, we had agreed upon a number of recommendations or principles. And as 20 years have passed, how do you assess the progress or the failure of what we have recommended? Was the time in 2003 ready? How is the situation 20 years later? How do you look at the future ahead of this conference?
Thank you, Johan. Certainly it was a monumental step forward to run the summit, and there were 4 key papers. And if you'll assess those 4 key papers, their outcomes have been very beneficial. And there's a whole lot of it, details on the Global Fire Monitoring Centre. I was going to go into all that, I won't because of time, but if I assess them, out of the 4 key papers, we've actually could go tick, tick, tick on all of them, with the exception of one, which is half there, and I think that was your paper about strategy for future development. We have had these international conferences, so that's been half of it. The other half was to have another summit, and we haven't had another summit. And I really think we do need to have another summit. That's one way of assessing it. The other way of assessing it is, one of the key ones was about international cooperation, which we've been talking about here, and sending resources. Murray Dudfield from New Zealand and myself organised the deployment of Australian New Zealanders over to America. And in the last 20 years, that's happened probably about 15 times. Now, I know everybody doesn't have all the resources all the time to meet every eventuality. But when I reflect on, I think 15 times in 2 decades, that's too often. That's a regular occurrence. And maybe we're actually failing. And it's really a symbol that while we do need it when we're in dire straits, we need that international cooperation. What we're not really doing is dealing with the real fundamental issues, is why we're running out of resourcing all the time. And it's not just a matter of money, not just a matter of bigger equipment or whatever it means in a given country. It's about actually addressing the issues of the land. And we're focused on that here, and I'd hope that there's one thing that comes out of the conference is that we realise we've got to go back and look at some fundamentals and make some fundamental changes to the future. So sorry, it was a good news story, but it's got a bad outcome as well.
Thanks, Gary. I would like now to refer to some of the questions that came from the audience, and we still have a little bit time, not too much. There's one question, I start with this one, and maybe I direct it to Gabriel, because the question is, what would you do with $10 million in your respective work field or a region you are working in? And I'm directing the question to a small country like Greece, because for an international organization, maybe $10 million is not that much. But if your organization, for instance, would receive $10 million what would you do with this?
Basically, I would direct it to improving the training system, to do a real good training system, because they have an academy, but it's not good enough, to do a good coordination center with really well-trained coordinators who would be able to receive also help much more effectively, but also make decisions without any influences from the outside, make that thing change. But for me, what I have suggested in my country is that we spend 10 million per year in order to bring in the Forest Service, two foresters in each one of the Forest Service offices. There are 100 Forest Service offices that will deal year-round with fire prevention. Not with fire prevention, with forest fires. From the post-fire rehabilitation where we have fires, to mapping the fires and making them, putting them in the law so that they are protected for a number of years from interventions, so that the people will not be grabbing land or doing illegal things to the land, to training at schools, at the public, to helping villagers to develop their own plans, to try to liaise with the fire service, because one of the things that I'm seeing, and I heard it from somebody today, is that I think in Portugal it was the assessment that Mr. Pereira said, Dr. Pereira said in the morning, that you have prevention much better done, but then you have firefighters ignorant of what we have done in prevention, where you have cleaned, what so on. This is something that we are doing now. We suggested to the fire service with the graduate students, let's do it. But if we had foresters that would do work year-round, that's when they would do prevention. Right now, what they are doing is run for everything else, and when April comes, they say, oh, fires are coming. But that doesn't work. So you have to have trained people with the capacities to do the mapping, to do the fuel modeling, to do observation, all the things that are needed, and 2 people would be enough, and that would be the best 10 million. Right now, we are spending more than 90 million per year on aerial resources. We could reduce a little bit of that and move it to prevention in that sense.
Thank you, Gabriel. One of the few questions, we have received about 4 questions, I would like to direct again to Lara. Are there any strategy and governance guidelines you would suggest for the national and especially regional fire management networks? Which of the guidelines?
Which of the guidelines?
Yes. Strategy and governance guidelines. So, do we have them? Yes, we do have some.
We do have. Yes, we do have them. We do have them. And in the hub that I was mentioning, the idea is to put all these documents that are already developed. These documents will guide the development of the hub. Yeah. And may I add one thing related to that question? Because I think one important thing, when we are talking about integrated fire management, we can have people specialized in a specific point in this word that is integrated fire management, but it's important that everyone, the firefighter, the prevention person, has the whole picture of what is integrated fire management, and so we can avoid that you mentioned. Yeah.
I would have a comment here.
Very briefly, Gabriel.
Okay. What we proposed in the international committee doing the assessment, independent committee in Greece, wasn't to give a solution with a law but we wanted to have a small organization that would be able to oversee and direct and would not be within each one of these silo-oriented organizations in the country, but it would be overseeing close to the Prime Minister. And that would have what Gary said in the morning, that nobody has all the truth. But within such an organization that would work together, that would be, they can be university professors, but they can be practitioners, they could be together, real expertise, and then they would work and have this integration at that level, and then push out policies and oversee and monitor and evaluate.
Thanks, Gabriel. Now, as we are coming to the end, I would not like to miss to reply to 2 questions that were asked from the audience. One is concerning the question, many countries, much of the knowledge and resources are sitting with non-governmental and private sector agencies. How do you include these and other agencies in agreement? I think we spoke about it. You know, at international level, Lara, the FAO, was talking about the open tent. You know, it is open to non-government stakeholders. And that indeed is also very necessary, not to say mandatory, for national policies and for best governance at national level. The first question that was actually asked was about numerous studies have demonstrated that the lives lost in the flames from wildfires are the fewest out of all natural disasters globally. Yet the wildfire issue that causes the great number of deaths and creates cross-border conflicts is smoke, a topic not even featured at the conference this year. how do we address this, or in our push for the wildfire framework and integrated fire management. And by purpose, in the opening, I had mentioned that the WHO, the World Health Organization, WMO guidelines on vegetation fire events have been addressing this issue of smoke pollution, human health and security, and that indeed, and that is a true remark, the amount of people being prematurely killed by smoke pollution arising from vegetation fires is very high. We estimate, according to some models, that between 180 and 300,000 people are dying every year due to the impacts of smoke pollution. And these premature deaths usually do not enter the media. We don't see them, and this is why we call them the silent deaths. And in the last International Wildland Fire Conference in Brazil, we had dedicated a specific session. And here, one of our specialized agencies of the UN family, the World Meteorological Organization, has taken up this issue. And at the moment, the WMO is building centers that are similarly structured to our regional fire management resource centers. They are dealing with not only fire early warning, but also with the prediction of smoke pollution and early warning of population. So this is an important issue, an important question that came up from the audience. I think that with a total of 1.5 hours, we could not answer all the outstanding questions. And this is exactly, where the conference is intending to lead. If we are looking at the best governance from local to international level, and that these different aspects that we have been discussing today, not in the necessary depth and details, that these need to be addressed. So with this, I'm coming to the conclusion of this meeting. I'm sorry that we had to use all of the coffee break, but maybe some coffee is left downstairs, but we do not want to stay longer, and there's another session following right now. And we will then meet some of us in the session of the Global Wildland Fire Network, and I thank you for your participation. Thanks a lot.